We will start in 3 minutes, please. Damak,
oh, Rafika.
Wait.
That's
So thank you very much for coming back for the second panel, which will deal with a very important issue, and this is all about possible solutions and possible ideas how to arrive at a solution. And of course, this is also very important for parliamentarians, because of course we will have to find out if a legal initiative must be done, and if so, in which way it should be done. Which content do we have to approach? Do we have to spread it over different dossiers, or will we have an overarching trade agreement whatsoever? So these are the problems that we try to deal with. It's all about solutions, and I can present interesting speakers to you. This is for first Peter Ericson from Telecomix. I only want to read out how they present themselves. It's a decentralized cluster of net activists who have joined forces to collaborate on issues concerning access to a free internet without intrusive surveillance. These issues span over many subjects and areas, which are reflected in the breadth of competences and opinions. There are no leaders nor members. It is simply an international chaotic event, and our actions cannot be predicted in detail. We are a flow of passions, and we sometimes refer to our driving force as data love. Afterwards, we will hear Gerard de Graaf, the Director of Information Society and Media Directorate General of the European Commission. And we will hear Susan Morgan, the Executive Director of the Global Network Initiative, which is an initiative of a coalition of leading information and communication companies, major human rights organizations, academics, investors and technology leaders to tackle the problem of freedom online. And Smári McCarthy, Research Director of Icelandic Modern Media Institute and co-founder and board member of the Icelandic Digital Freedoms Society. This project was cooperatively organized by numerous organizations and members of the Icelandic Parliament. So, as we Europeans are thinking and waiting what will be the Icelandic impact on European policy, so this might be a first sign of it. It creates a supportive and attractive jurisdiction for the publication of investigative journalism and other threatens online media. So we have a broad range of possibilities to touch upon, and we will start with Peter Ericson to present Telecomix. Please.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Peter Ericson. You can see my email address down at the left corner of the slide. And I'm going to present Telecomix and the Intercom project. So what is Telecomix? You had one definition from Lichtenberger, and another definition is it is an ongoing conversation. Please, next slide. This is a social network, the sociogram of the connections in the IRC channel as of earlier this afternoon. And next slide. This is the IRC channel, the chat channel, where we plan, we discuss, we joke, as in this, and as in the next slide, we actually talk about cryptographics. We talk about how to integrate web surfing into dark nets and email through anonymous means. But in the end, we aim for the same thing, which is communication. We want people to communicate in various ways. That is a sort of a ugly graph showing some of the components of Telecomix. We have the IRC chat, which is our main base of operations. We have various collaborative writing tools like pads, where you can use short-term projects to produce letters to send to members of parliament, or communiques to communicate with people listening to us. We have wikis where we set up larger, more long-term projects like tutorials for internet users, how to communicate anonymously and securely. And we also set up other sites, completely new sites, where we can do more long-term projects. It is sort of chaotic in many ways, and it is almost impossible to describe unless you have actually experienced it and joined us in our workings. Telecomix has also spawned several other projects, one of which I'm going to concentrate on a bit later. And we split off these projects because of various reasons. For example, Telecomix is, as a disorganization, not very good with money, because money demands accountability and some sort of organization on who gets what money to do what. And the next slide shows the Intercom project, which was split off since it has a very ambitious goal. And that goal is to be what was discussed last panel as impossible. Namely, that we are the glue that circumvent the censorship. We are the self-healing mechanisms of the net. And we do that by letting activists in oppressed countries, we let regular internet users have their access blocked by disasters of various kinds, be they governmental or natural or whatever they may be. We, through Intercom, at least try to reach those people and let them get access to the internet again, the uncensored internet. Yes, next slide please. And what do we want? Why do we do this? These are kind of stereotypical goals, as usual. We want peace on earth and all that, and goodwill to all men, and we want to accomplish this through people talking. We want to accomplish this through communication, peace through communication. Because if people can communicate with each other, with people outside, they can at least get a taste of other viewpoints and maybe decide not to kill each other. Maybe. And especially, this is especially true if it is easier to actually talk to people than to fight them. And we're also very focused on private communication between two people. And in those conversations, there can be no censorship to accommodate an honest discussion and an honest exchange of ideas. And you as legislators and as members of the EU, citizens, etc., can help us or hinder us. You can help us ensure net neutrality. There is no discrimination based on content. There may be reasons for blocking specific destinations, for shutting down a spamming server or whatever, but these are all based on endpoints, on this or that server is misbehaving. There can be no discrimination based on content, on what is actually being transmitted through the internet. And also that is something related to the common carrier, that is, the ISPs are not responsible for what is being transmitted through their internet, through their nets. And there can be no censorship, because any censorship by the EU, by countries in the EU, are legitimizing the censorship that is being done in Iran or in China. Especially China has gone out very strongly and said that, well, UK or the US or whatever, you can't really say anything about our censorship because you're doing it. We're using your software that is being developed in your countries for your users, and we're simply using the same thing. So we want to stop the reaches for censorship that is being applied in, and blocking that is being applied in the EU, and we want you to help us. And finally, we need better infrastructure. We need more connections to neighboring countries. We need an uncensored and free infrastructure and good access to it. And finally, you can join us. We want always more participants and more people that can help us do things and that can help us, give us new ideas for things to do. And also the Intercom project has a support page where you can donate money or time or expertise. So come join us in our chat channels and talk to us and learn from us and let us learn from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was a very short and concentrated presentation, but anyway, I think it was an interesting idea. So as next speaker, I want to ask Mr. de Graaf, what would he say to an initiative like that? And would you like to join?
Well, maybe don't. I mean, ask me in a few days' time, maybe, and I'll give you an answer on this. I mean, maybe before I react to what just said, maybe I should say where we stand as the European Commission on these issues, because that's the organization I represent. Just maybe I mean, I'm very pleased to be here, and of course extremely appreciative of the Parliament to organize this and to create the opportunities where we can exchange views, and I think I would be the first to admit that the Commission certainly doesn't have all the solutions, because I'm a bit worried about the title of this session about solutions, but maybe we can together at least explore some avenues to get to solutions, and maybe what I'm going to say now will give us some indications of where we can look for solutions. I think first of all I want to take a step back. We're talking very much about the Internet here as a kind of a vehicle for expression of use of the freedoms that we have, the fundamental rights, and that's obviously perfectly true. But I think if we're honest, I mean, there have always been repressive regimes. They didn't come about at the same time as the internet was invented. They existed before, and they were as kind of unacceptable as they are today. If we look at what has happened more recently in what you could either call the southern Mediterranean, as we tend to call it, or North Africa, as maybe most normal people would call it, I think it's fair to say that what happened was not because of the internet. What happened was because there was a very difficult economic situation. I mean, people here who frankly didn't see that there was a future for them or for their children. I mean, price of bread was going up. I mean, you know all of this, and I think we have to be very precise that we do not confuse the cause, the origin of the problem with what I would call the catalyst. But also there I think we have to put things a bit into perspective, because in these countries, particularly in North Africa, I mean, the internet usage is very low. I mean, we're talking low single digits here. I mean, that's not to underestimate the importance of the internet and electronic communications, but it is to show that the internet played a role. But there are much deeper causes than other. I mean, ultimately people went out on the street. I mean, they put their bodies physically in harm's way, and I think we should not forget that. And what does that lead us to? And I think it leads us to acknowledging that there are no easy and quick solutions to this problem. But I think the greatest threat to dictatorships is always education and economic development. And that's what we need to bear in mind, and particularly if you have seen the Commission's or the EU strategy towards the southern Mediterranean, it's very much aimed at creating prosperity, at promoting civic society, education, etc., because that is ultimately the solution to the underlying problem of repressive regimes. You want to get to pluralistic societies, democratic societies, societies with opportunities and with economic growth. And that's where ICT obviously can also play a very important role. And if you simply look, I mean, I think one of the colleagues on the first panel said there were 4 internet services providers in Egypt. Well, I mean, why were there only 4? Because the telecoms market, to put it very simply, is not working in most of these countries. It is heavily government dominated. There's no competition in these sectors. There is not independent, and often I would say even incompetent regulators, and therefore there is a lot to be done to create the conditions for actually the internet to grow and for people to have to be able to afford it, to have choice, etc., and also to make it more difficult for governments, and particularly repressive governments, to try to switch the internet off. And I think the Egyptian case is again interesting because, I mean, in Egypt, the kind of activity that was not closed off from the internet was the Egyptian stock exchange, because that was too costly to the Egyptian economy. So if we could create a situation where switching off or significantly blocking the internet amounts to, for a country, a repressive regime in particular, to shooting yourself enormously in the foot, that is probably the best way to avoid this kind of events that we've seen unfold in Northern Africa to repeat themselves in other parts of the world, or even in the same parts of the world. So we need to create the conditions for prosperity. We need to make it too costly for these countries themselves to disconnect themselves from the internet. So that, I think, as by way of introduction, I know this may not be essentially the focus of the debate, but I think we should absolutely not forget that. We, as European Commission, I mean, we recognize that the threat is growing, and I think some of the colleagues on the first panel said that, and therefore it's absolutely important that the international community, and this is not just government, but it certainly includes government, but it is in NGOs. I mean, we send strong messages around the world that this is not acceptable. We raise these issues in the G8, in the OECD, in the Council of Europe, in the Internet Governance Forum under the United Nations in Nairobi, so that, I mean, this may not help immediately, but it must be very embarrassing. We must make it as embarrassing as possible for third countries to kind of get to the point where they're actually denying their own citizens the access to the internet. So that, I think, is for certainly one important objective and one important task that we're seeing. And we will be raising as a European Commission, as a European Union, this issue increasingly in the appropriate international fora. I want to respond to actually a question that came in the first session about the EU. I think the gentleman from Yahoo said, well, I mean, wait a second, the EU is not crystal clean itself. There's also issues in the EU. And that may be true, but I think we have to be also very clear here. I mean, let's put things into perspective. I mean, having a policeman come to your door in Belgium is a totally different experience than having a policeman come to your door in Syria or in Iran or in China. There are certainly problems. I don't think anybody wants to deny them. I mean, we know the problems are particularly related to the enforcement of the copyrights, but I don't think that this should in any way hinder the European Union to use its opportunities to have its voice heard in international context, that the Internet as a vehicle for the expression of fundamental rights is something that needs to be respected by every government around the world. Is there a need for further regulation? I mean, we have regulation in place. Regulation applies to the EU. We don't regulate for the likes of China, Syria and Iran, whether you like that or not. So that's not problems we can solve through European regulation. We have dual-use regulation in place in the European Union. I think there was certainly a lot of discussion in the first panel about that. The framework is there. I mean, there is a large list, if you are interested, a large kind of annex to the dual-use regulation with all kinds of products that are subject to specific controls. And I fully agree with, I mean, particularly Mr. Merkel, I think, who said in the first panel that it should be very worrying if we export things which kind of obviously in the hands of lawful regimes are not a problem, but in the hands of repressive regimes are a serious problem. It's the same thing as a knife in the hands of a criminal or a knife in the hands of a cook. I feel more comfortable when the knife is in the hands of the cook than in the hands of the criminal. So there's certainly, this discussion is ongoing. And when you say solutions or think, I mean, this is an issue of great political importance where probably we need to have another look. I mean, it's not directly the responsibility of DG INSO, but it is certainly extremely relevant, and there are lessons to be learned, and there are lessons that we're still learning today. But the regulatory framework is there. It is about how are we going to apply it. I want to conclude on kind of what is very important to the Commission and certainly very important to Vice President Kroes, which she has termed the no disconnect strategy. I mean, in the aftermath of the events in Egypt, I mean, the Commission has come forward with this plan about prosperity and democracy in the southern Mediterranean. There are references there to the Commission looking to support organizations and citizens to, in a way, continue to enjoy the benefits of access to the Internet. So to either kind of reconnect them, if that would be possible, or to bypass censorship and circumvent it. This is not easy. I mean, we also have to act as a European Union. If we ask other countries around the world to abide by international law, we need to abide by international law ourselves. I mean, in the case of Egypt, I mean, to reconnect Egypt would have amounted to us physically entering the Egyptian territory to put up base stations and enable satellite communication to take place. This is not something that is in the realm of the politically feasible, but there are other things which we can do in terms of possibly training people to use these tools, the electronic communications. There's also technological solutions that we can develop through our research programs. But again, and I think we have to be very mindful, the Internet and ICT are fantastic tools, but they also have this dark side. We're working, for example, very closely with a number of Internet services providers and also our Safe Internet program to develop tools to ensure that child pornography can be removed very quickly from the Internet. And these tools are very sophisticated. They scan the Internet for kind of pictures, and if they identify, say, kind of certain similarities in the picture can be removed very quickly from the Internet. That's a fantastic tool for the purpose of protecting ourselves and our children, particularly from the harmful content and particularly from illegal activities such as child pornography. But the same tools in the hands of a repressive regime would enable, for example, the Chinese government to remove all photographs or all references to the Nobel Prize, the Chinese Nobel Prize winner. So again, I mean, we have to kind of be always mindful that something that can be used as a force for the good can also be used by those who seek evil. The reality is often, of course, that those who seek evil purposes already have the technology, and that maybe you can actually kind of provide benefits by giving the technology to those who will use it for good purposes and don't have access to it yet. But just all in conclusion, this is a terribly important issue. The Commission is extremely committed to working and providing the conditions for the Internet to play its role, for kind of prosperity and democracy to take hold all around the globe. But this will take some time. It will certainly require all of us to work together in support, NGOs, I mean the Parliament, the European Commission, Member States, governments, and to put the pressure, increasing pressure on countries that do not accept the international norms and the fundamental rights and freedoms. I leave it there, but I'm of course happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. This was a very clear and I think informative talk about the position of the Commission also, because of course we have to be in close communication on these issues all over. But we will come back to that, and now we will find a kind of model outside of legislative processes, but concerning the providers, concerning the businesses within the whole field, and how things could work out from their perspective out. Please, Mrs. Morgan.
Thank you. So firstly, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this hearing. It seems it's a real kind of welcome exploration around the intersection between human rights and ICT. I think it's a timely discussion, and it's also good to see an exploration of possible solutions. I'm going to focus my remarks on an explanation of the Global Network Initiative, who we are, what we do, and how it works in the context of providing possible solutions to the issues that we've heard about. But before I start on that, I just wanted to make a few observations. So it seems that communication technologies really are playing an increasingly integral role in people's everyday lives. I think that's true economically, socially and politically, and there's now over 2 billion people around the world online. The challenges that we've seen highlighted in the Middle East and North Africa really show the issues around public discourse increasingly taking place on privately owned and operated networks. And I think we've seen, a real governments becoming increasingly interested. And I think Caroline on the first panel talked about the growing trend of censorship and the fact that there's been a massive increase in the last 10 years on internet censorship. And what this means for companies is that companies can find themselves effectively caught in the middle between government requests and demands on the one hand and the human rights around freedom of expression and privacy of their users on the other hand. And also I think it's increasingly apparent that there's a real knowledge gap for users in terms of the relationship between governments and companies, the policies that companies employ, and the risks for users. And I think this is all happening as well. I wanted to make reference to the work that's happening in the UN at the moment, which is twofold. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, Frank LaRue, is in the final stages of a report which is due to go to the Human Rights Council in June on freedom of expression on the internet. And then finally, the Professor John Ruggie has developed over the last 6 years of his mandate at the UN something called a Protect, Respect and Remedy framework, which again is looking at providing a framework for businesses in terms of how they can respect human rights. So I think that's the kind of context, and I wanted to say a little bit about the Global Network Initiative. So we're a multi-stakeholder initiative, and we have companies, so Google, Microsoft and Yahoo are the founding companies of the initiative. We have civil society organisations, and I won't list them all, but it's as broad as Human Rights Watch, Human Rights First, the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Centre for Democracy and Technology, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, amongst others. We have investors in the US, in the UK and in Sweden, and we have academics such as the Berkman Centre at Harvard University. And really we have a large aim. What we're aiming to do is over time to seed a global standard in corporate responsibility in the ICT sector, really to look at how you protect and advance freedom of expression and privacy online. So we have a big task ahead of us. And I think, you know, it was that intersection between government requests and demands and protecting the rights of users that I think really brought about this, what I like to call unlikely coalition of people really looking at how could you provide a framework and a way in which companies could start to think through how to make decisions on these issues. So over several years, the people that I've mentioned created a set of principles and implementation guidelines which are based on international human rights standards that really try to do exactly that, to look at how can companies think through and integrate into their decision-making processes the potential impacts that the technology that they develop, the products and services that they sell, and the markets that they operate in, the human rights impacts, particularly around freedom of expression and privacy. So that guidance covers very, very broad things. So, for example, the importance of carrying out human rights impact assessments, the importance of training staff, the importance of communicating with staff, right through to specific guidance on what to do when receiving a government request. So, for example, interpreting it narrowly, requesting it in writing, those kinds of things. Alongside the framework that we provide, we do three other things. The first is to provide a process of accountability for companies. So when companies sign up to become members of the GNI, they commit to a process of independent assessment on how well they're implementing the principles. So they have a process, they have a two years from when they join GNI to when the assessments start. And the first assessments will start for the 3 existing companies this year. We think there's a role for GNI in policy engagement. So given that we have such a broad range of organisations who are working with us, we're thinking through how do we engage on these issues in a number of places around the world. And then finally, we offer a place really for shared learning in a sort of safe space. So people who are involved in the Global Network Initiative get the opportunity to build trusted relationships with very, very diverse stakeholders who are able to help them think through, offer advice as they're facing issues and making decisions. I think probably the final point that I would make is that we're really very much at the beginning of our work. We've been incorporated as an organisation for 12 months. The negotiations around the principles took a couple of years before that, but I think we're still at the beginning. So we're still shaping the work, we're still developing it, and I think that organisations who join us now really have the chance to participate in that. And I think, you know, what we've seen in events in the last few months and probably going back the last couple of years is that the companies that are affected by these issues really spread right the way across the sector. So we're hoping that we will see a much broader range of companies joining GNI in the future.
Thank you very much. I think this was very interesting, and of course it will be the more interesting the longer the process goes on, and if we then can see the first results of those assessments, external assessments that come to the long-standing members. So when will this be the case?
So the first assessments take place this year. And GNI will produce a report in the early part of 2012 about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think this is very important to know, because this is also something that could give us the possibility to have a look at it, what works, what does not work, what need of kind of legal framework to be developed, especially when it comes to Europe or the United States, so that at least those parts of the world should then develop kind of legal framework which is accompanying this process very well. So thank you very much, and now we come to our Icelandic representative, which I'm very interested in because it's a little bit new for me. I'm a little bit south in Europe, so anyway. And please, Mr. Smári McCarthy was not the singer?
No,
so,
no.
For your words.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm not going to focus too much on the specific ideas we're trying to implement in Iceland, but rather try and break it out into a more European context and try to explore what we can do here. I'd like to kind of start off by this quote that I saw recently, and it's been kind of guiding a lot of my thinking in recent months, from Valery Legozov, who said, after having been the chairman of the committee that was investigating the Chernobyl disaster, he said 6 months after the investigation was finished that I have come to the paradoxical conclusion that technology must be protected from man. And I think that this kind of, if we put this into the context of the internet, then we can actually get a lot of interesting ideas. Because as technology is playing an increasingly prominent role in civil society, the interplay between fundamental rights and technology becomes more and more complicated. The potential of new technologies to enlighten and inspire us it's brought new challenges to political stability and socio-economic reality and even just our very livelihoods. And of course what we're trying to figure out here is whether new technologies and human rights are at odds, whether they're commensurable, or whether they're co-requisite. And I think there's a lot of different approaches that we can take here. At the very basic level, what we're talking about is human beings who are willfully trying to exercise their right to communicate with one another. And the right to communicate is not a simple right. It implies the right to receive and transmit, create, alter, and store information. And that's a taxonomy of rights which it's embedded in the very nature of the universe itself. So that's great, but it hasn't been informing the way laws have been created over since whenever. And the reasons for this are a bit historical, because it's only about 200 years since the countries in the west of Europe started to reach the philosophical understanding that that the right to free speech was an important right to have. And since then, very little has changed legislatively in how we actually protect the right to free speech, although, lots of different exceptions have crept in. And up until that time, the rights to receive and transmit and create and alter and store information were very strictly controlled by the ruling classes of the time, who were essentially had very strong benefit from keeping control of the technologies and keeping control of the political arena. But not all that much has actually changed. So, although the freedom to communicate is guaranteed in our constitutions and human rights declarations and all sorts of legal mechanisms, different legal mechanisms and all sorts of corporate systemic methods and whatnot are being used to limit it in practice. And of course we have to remember law is not the only way to regulate. Technology is not apolitical. So we've got, in the legislative sphere, people like us who are sitting here, kind of trying to lobby for some change, trying to figure out what we can actually do. And on the one hand, we're trying to say, stop regulating our ability to, use, copy, share, modify, acquire and transmit information. But on the other hand, we're asking please help us figure out a way to not have others infringe on our right to do that. And there is a bit of an irony to that, of course. We as technologists are aware at a very fundamental level that all of what we're trying to achieve would be better achieved if we were to employ technical means, because policy is policy. And policy is just something that somebody decided, and even if that's a very strong political body, it's going to be subverted at some point. So, when the internet was first built, we had this modicum of structurelessness, and all of the structure emerged after that. So, now we have to ask questions about, what is that structure being used to do, and how can we protect these rights that we want to protect within that structure. And, we've seen different economic and political forces try and segment the markets up into, or the internet up into demographic sectors, market regions, and use discriminated pricing models, basically violate what we call network neutrality. And then we see these political cases like, for example, during the Egyptian uprising when Libya was apparently blocking satellite signals from Al Jazeera from getting to Libya. And this, of course, was causing lots and lots of trouble. We see a lot of the big threats to what we're doing come through politics, but not malevolence. People are actually trying to do their best. The European Commission is actually trying to do the best for protecting children when they introduce measures such as filtering, blocking child pornography, as opposed to using more or less the same mechanisms as the banking sector uses to shut down fraudulent websites. On average, fraudulent websites in the financial sector are shut down within 6 hours of detection. For some reason, the European Commission wants to brush the issue of child pornography under the rug by enforcing filter lists. So, there's lots of problems that we see. And the International Modern Media Institute has the goal of revising and reviewing this philosophy of free speech protections and try and figure out whether we can help the policymakers act wisely in their approach to the interplay between ICTs and human rights. So, what can we do? Well, there's a few things. One is we really want to guarantee network neutrality. This is something we need to see happen as soon as possible. We need some kind of legal safeguards against the violation of the end-to-end principle, the idea of the originator and the endpoint of the communications controlling the communications, not the intermediaries. And there's other things. The new Audiovisual Media Services Directive is an improvement in many ways, but it's also been shown to be very flawed, if only by the fact that countries such as Hungary have transposed it into something of a censorship device. So, that is actually affecting the internet as much as it's affecting traditional media. We also need, as Caroline was saying earlier, we need an understanding that our physical markets are limited by the availability of information. And we have in Europe the free movement of goods, services, labour and capital, but without the free movement of information, without this kind of fifth freedom, we're going to be artificially limiting our ability to improve our markets. And for that, in that case, what we should be doing is first trying to find a way to get that fifth freedom into the treaties, but then enforcing it in such a way that in all of our free trade agreements, we want to be enforcing that rule. If you want to do business with Europe, and remember, Europe is a massive importer of commodities and goods from even oppressive countries like China, if you want to do business with Europe, then you have to allow the free movement of information within your country, or at least over the borders towards us. A second thing here would be a sense of outreach, which is there's lots of fibre optics within Europe, but how many fibre optics cables are going into countries like Belarus? So we need to have, as Petra was saying, good access to infrastructure. But that infrastructure can't just be within Europe. We need to take at least one step out of Europe, go to the next countries over. And we also need to be very cautious of these ideas like the law enforcement working party was discussing an idea of digital Schengen, creating these kind of border controls for information flow. Because, frankly, this is a way of segmenting the internet up and making it completely non-usable. It sounds very good if you're a big enthusiast in border control, but I thought that the idea of the European Union was to destroy borders rather than create them. And, you know, our culture has to be safeguarded from intellectual monopolies, which are being maintained for purposes of economic hegemony. There's a lot of use of intellectual property regime as a censorship mechanism. Copyright is actually becoming the #1 mechanism for censorship. France's Hautala law is a good example of that. And we need to, really regard all invasions of our personal privacy with a lot of hostility, because there's lots of laws, especially after, for example, the data retention law, or data retention directive, which came as a direct response to the attacks in London and Madrid. It's kind of a knee-jerk reaction where people are actually sacrificing our privacy on the altar of some imagined security, and recent studies have shown that this isn't actually panning out all that well. Less than 0.002% of criminal cases have been informed by retained data, if I remember my statistics correctly. So, finally, we've got organizations like Telecomix, which are actually trying to figure out the technological methods of ensuring our freedom online. But in the meantime, before their agenda has been complete, we need the kind of political agenda to not get in our way. As Peter said, you can either stand against us or move with us, kind of. So, technologists need a bit of peace to just sit down and slowly work out the details of how to realize the full potential of information communications technologies. So, what we're saying is, please help us and let us help you. That's we can figure this out together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So now we had 4 very interesting and very challenging speakers, and I think, of course, some on the panel would also like to respond to what the other panelists have said. So I first would also ask for an answering or commenting round on the panel, and then go to all of you for kind of short debate on the whole issues, and maybe also bringing in some more ideas. I saw that Mr. de Graaf was very keen on answering what has been said from the last speaker. Please.
You saw me shaking my head on a number of occasions, I think that, which probably is the same thing as asking for the floor. Just a couple of points and maybe reactions and clarifications. I mean, the Internet is not a zone that is free of regulation. I mean, we don't have a situation where we regulate offline and then the online world is a total Wild West. I mean, what is illegal offline is illegal online. And so I think that has to be very clear, because I get a bit the impression that kind of the Internet deserves some kind of specific treatment. There were a couple, I think we're talking always about striking a balance here. I mean, we have heard about law enforcement, we've heard about the possible kind of risk to fundamental freedoms. I mean, this balance needs to be struck, and it's a balance that needs to be struck by our democratic institutions in a political process. And you can disagree with the outcome or not, but it's not an arbitrary decision that somebody took to say, look, let's strike this balance over here. It's a decision that came out of a democratic process with a transparent way of decision taking, and then you can still argue whether that's the right decision or not, but I don't think you can call the decision into question. I think it's particularly relevant for data retention. I mean, I think if you look at the general public, I mean, if you can catch, I mean, yes, there's always risk to privacy, because when you look at data going, you don't know, oh, that's the terrorist and that's not the terrorist. You probably have to look at more people to find who is the potential terrorist. But I think that, I mean, you cannot belittle the need to use all possible means to avoid, if only one terrorist attack. And so to say, look, data retention is kind of, I mean, that is such a threat to the privacy of people that therefore we shouldn't kind of have that at all, or it's not useful at all, I think is way out of proportion. There were a couple of specific points made, I think, in passing, one on child pornography, and that the EU or the European Commission favours filtering over closing down. I don't know where that statement comes from. I mean, we have clear procedures and rules in the European Union about notice and take down. There is cooperation between the member states, the hotlines. Can that cooperation be improved? Can the time that it takes to close down these operations be quickened? Is it acceptable that if there is a phishing site, it's closed down in a few hours' time? If you have a child pornography site, it may take several days. Is that acceptable? No, that's not acceptable. And Vice President Kroes doesn't think it's acceptable. But we need to use all tools to fight child pornography, and it is not just that the EU has some preference for filtering only. The Hungarian media law was passed in review. This was not a transposition of the AVMS, just to be precise. This was an autonomous act of the Hungarian government which we addressed and attacked under European law, insofar as we could use European law to attack those aspects of the Hungarian media law. It is wrong to think that the European Union has enormous wide discretion to take action against all member states whenever there is an issue of fundamental freedoms at stake. I mean, we have to act like any citizen, like any organization, within the competences that we have been given. We have the Charter of Fundamental Rights, but the Charter of Fundamental Rights permits the Commission only to intervene insofar as it involves the exercise, the implementation of European Union legislation. And I think if you look at the results of what the European Commission, particularly Vice President Kroes, managed to obtain in terms of changes to the Hungarian legislation, I think it is too easy to say that the European Union hasn't acted with the necessary fervour and vigour. I mean, I think digital Schengen, and this is a personal comment, is a total nonsense. So let's not pursue a red herring here.
If I may, only to have a precise point on that, I think the criticism on the Hungarian media law was less on the implemented legislation process that has been initiated, but that people wanted something more, that a much more focus should have been put on human rights breaches, because, of course, in reality, still the Hungarian media law, like it exists right now, will more or less close down every publication which is critical to government, step by step. So this is the problem. Lots of people, I get lots of mails that people wanted to go further and said that kind of paragraph 7 procedure should have been initiated. Because this was much more than only in the implementation control and implementation process. To be clear,
yes.
I think one has to differentiate.
Well, I think the Commission shares the concerns. I mean, I think there is no misunderstanding here. We're not defending the Hungarian media law. Let's be very clear, or at least the objectionable aspects of the Hungarian media law. I mean, we, as an institution, I mean, the Parliament, the Council would be the first to call the Commission to order if we would kind of go beyond our competences in other areas. I mean, it happens regularly, so we have to act within the competences that the treaty confers upon the Commission. And you can say, well, in this particular case, we wish that the Commission had more competences so that it could do more, and we would probably share that view. But we have acted in the competence that we've been given. There is other, I mean, there is the Council of Europe, there is the Convention on Human Rights, so citizens can take cases in the national courts. These national courts can can transfer these cases to Strasbourg. So it is also not that the European Commission or the European Union is the only player in this area. I mean, it's a very complicated, legally complicated case, and so maybe not the subject of to this afternoon's discussion, but I think it's important to recognize that the Commission shares the concerns and is doing everything it can, not just in Hungary, but all over Europe to protect media pluralism and media freedom.
Thank you very much. Of course, this would be very interesting to go on further, like an example on this Hungarian media law, because this could show very clearly how a legal body can react to things like that. But anyway, I think we can also save this to the discussion, but I want to give the other panelists the floor to react on kind of what has been said by the other panelists first in short, so that we can have some discussion up there too. Please.
So I think it seems to me that this conversation about solutions is at a very early stage. Yeah. Perhaps this is not a startling observation, but yeah, and that it will develop, and that what may develop over time, and probably it will be a complex ecosystem of a number of different kind of interventions and things that will provide part of the solution.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a couple of notes. First, that this notion of that a policeman in Belgium knocking on the door is not the same as a policeman in, for example, Syria, which is of course true.
You won't have a policeman in Belgium.
There has been some rather interesting raids also in EU countries. For example, a raid by the police on the Pirate Bay, for example, where they took basically every computer in the building and put the owner of the company out of business and several million Swedish crowns in debt. Maybe not as much physical violence involved, but still it's pretty harsh for not doing anything that was actually legal. Also inconveniencing very many other companies which hosted service there. And there have also been other raids in various places. In the US lately there have been morning raids by basically SWAT teams for people having an open wireless connection, since someone else was using that wireless connection for downloading child pornography, I believe. And well, sure, there is a distinction, but it is rapidly growing smaller and smaller, and we should maybe take note of that. And as for building, physically building lines into Egypt, that is actually not required. One can use ham radio, for example. We've done it to get the word out from there and to post media into there. The equipment's there. And also fax machines, for example, using phone lines. And yeah, well, there are ways always of getting info there. And now I'm curious, these tools to identify child pornography and get them off the internet, how do they work? Is that the filtering systems? Or is it some other way? It is filtering? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Because, again, there have been trials by, for example, Akvorat in Germany to get a hold of a list of, I think, 4,000 blocked sites, blocked because of child pornography in Sweden and Denmark. And they went through the list and found, I believe, 8 sites actually containing child pornography still. And they sent takedown notices to the ISPs, not only in EU countries, but also in Russia, in the US, and other places. And I think the maximum time from the email was sent until the site was offline was 4 hours. Filtering is unnecessary, and the technology is, if you use it, then other people will use that as an excuse to block other sites, not just child pornography.
So just to clarify, the Stansalimi is not to suggest making anything legal which is currently illegal. It is simply to better protect that which is currently legal but is under threat. Now, in that vein, I'm tempted to go into the entire debate about Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union. I won't right now, but seriously, the claim that you're using all your competences isn't actually valid. OSCE has made some very good claims against the current law. Also, regarding the issue of data retention, the fact that it, is it a democratic process? Well, 3 EU countries have already declared it unconstitutional, and the entire thing is up for review, but it can't be considered proportional in any way. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. So for the debate, we would have some very interesting points to touch upon, especially technology has to be protected from man. The role of intermediaries, which is very crucial for the ongoing technological development together with protecting the freedoms. And we have this kind of protecting the 5th freedom issue, the digital Schengen, which I want to mention again, because this is, of course, tried by some member states to at least erect something like that. And I sometimes feel a little bit caught in a book of Stanislav Lem, this very, very old science fiction, which I sometimes find much more talking than the new ones, when it comes to the new possibilities on the table and how to use it or not to use it. So the floor is yours. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for debate, so please be short and make your comments right now. Please.
Thank you. I'm Joe McNamee from European Digital Rights. I need to comment on various points, so I'll try to be quick. Regarding the identification software that Mr. de Graaf referred to, I think he's referring to PhotoDNA, which is a Microsoft product. It's been implemented for a little over a year in the US, and even though I haven't heard any positive statement about how effective it's being in the US, it's being pushed quite hard by certain organizations here. One of the ideas that the Commission had, as evidenced by the recital 13 of the original draft of the Child Exploitation Directive, was upload filtering. So, not just download filtering, which has got one set of problems, but upload filtering. What's interesting there is that it wasn't mentioned in the impact assessment, and there's also no evidence that it would do any good for that particular purpose. Of course, we can imagine lots of other useful uses for it. On data retention, I'm not asking, I can't imagine anything worse than trying to defend DG Home in public, so I'm not asking for a response from Mr. de Graaf. But I disagree with the concept that we should be doing everything possible to fight terrorism. We should be doing everything proportionate and effective, not everything. I think that's just a way of expressing oneself. We're in a situation at the moment where the evaluation report of the Commission shows that the single market directive on data retention is undermining the single market, and the Commission is suing member states to implement a single market directive to further undermine the single market. This is a problem, in my view. The actual effect of the data retention directive, when the European Commission was asking for information from member states on the effectiveness of data retention, it didn't ask for information about necessity. It hasn't delivered information about necessity. It asked in the letter that we've published on our website from the Commission to the Member States, it asked for information to show that data retention is useful, which is a lower level than the Charter would require. The information given in the evaluation report refers to usefulness of retained data, a subtle play on words, not data retained under the directive, but all retained data, i.e. also covering data that would also have been available as a result of data retained for billing purposes. So the evaluation report, if anything, is comprehensive proof that the Data Retention Directive was an incorrect measure on all levels, both for the single market and for dealing with terrorism. Moving to the next point, I completely agree on the issue of the Wild West on the Internet. We absolutely must not have a Wild West on the Internet. A week ago, China announced a plan to push obligations on Internet providers for policing copyright infringements on the Internet. And instead of having a legal framework, we move into a vigilante Wild West where the ISPs become the sheriffs. This is obviously completely contrary to our legal tradition, with the rule of law being primordial, and we should be opposing this. Unfortunately, exactly 2 weeks ago, Commissioner Barnier in this building announced plans to do exactly what China announced last week. So we don't have a leg to stand on. When it comes to cutting people off the Internet, we have a situation where, Mr. de Graaf, what you said was completely correct, but we also have the preparatory works of ACTA saying that there should be cooperation between Internet providers on the one hand and rights holders on the other hand, and the preparatory works say that this cooperation would include cutting people off from the Internet. How can we seriously criticize anybody for defending the Wild West when we're promoting a whole vigilante culture in the Wild West of the Internet? On a final point, what I've heard about the Commission's work, or DG Info's work, on a response to the events in the North Africa, Southern Mediterranean, I believe what I've heard is that the work being done on that shows fantastic vision and leadership, and I encourage and plead with you to continue the fantastic policy development on that, and I hope that the rest of the Commission ends up supporting what you're planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You were waiting already very long to raise your voice. And so it was a high amount of information, but nevertheless interesting questions. I would collect some more so that we could go in an answering round and then have a summary of the meeting. Is there anyone else who has... Yes, please.
Is it working? Yes. I'm Agnese Rossi from the European Federation of Journalists, and of course, like one of the issues that we've been working a lot since December last year is the Hungarian media law, and we really appreciate what the Parliament did with the resolution adopted on it and the work of the Commission, and this law is one of the first media laws that doesn't make any differences between traditional medias and the Internet, even if the traditional medias and the Internet have structural differences that should be taken in account from lawmakers. And the thing is that should this example be seen as a sign that maybe in the EU legal framework on the protection of freedom of expression and media freedom, there is some gray areas that the EU institution could and should work on to prevent that these things happen inside the EU. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there someone else? I would take on board still one and then close. Please.
Just a quick comment. Caroline de Kock. I was on the panel before for those that just entered afterwards. Mr. de Graaf talked about the fact that he sometimes had the impression that people were asking for different rights online than what was happening offline. I sometimes have the impression that policymakers consider there are different rights online than offline in the way they react to certain behaviors in the online world, which they would never consider acceptable in the offline world. If tomorrow certain countries were to block ports and harbors, inspect ships and throw away goods from foreign companies, I think the outrage would be a lot higher than it is now when they just block a website. It seems less important somehow, even though the economic effect is exactly the same, or maybe higher even. If tomorrow the water company said you can only give water to that type of flowers because I have an arrangement with that flower company or that florist, people would say how outrageous. Yet on the internet, when a commercial operator does that, it does not seem to offend people that much. If tomorrow my postal office, when I bring a letter to them, said, well, we're not going to charge you by weight, but who are you sending this letter to and is it important? Because if it's your tax company, it might cost more than if it's your mom. Everyone would go, well, that's outrageous. But somehow on the internet, it doesn't seem to create the same reactions. So I share your impression of different rights online and offline, or at least different interpretations to rights, but somehow I sometimes fear it's the other way round to a certain extent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is also a little bit due to the different knowledge about the online and the offline world and the different participation in it. So I think the whole thing, and this would be my question that I want to add in here, I think that the role of the intermediaries will be very crucial in the whole issue. If we use them for policing, as it is foreseen in some regular implications, then we get a problem. And I tell you what, I see the parallel to the transport sector. We had an opening of competition, for example, in aviation. We ended up with regional monopolies that if I want to fly, I am obliged to take one special line, even if they make the worst service ever. And this might be also the case, because the usual argument is you always can choose between the different operators, that at last you won't have a choice, because the market, of course, will structure itself in that way. So this is, of course, one of the dangers that would intervene in the principle of a free choice and the benefits of a free market then. So this is, I wanted to ask you if this consideration is present in your policy or not. So I ask you for very short answers, because then we will come up to the summary of the whole issue. And I tell you one thing, it will not be the last debate on that, because this is a very new field of technology. Legislation is always far behind the real processes, and so we have to try to speed up a bit. Okay. Please, who wants to answer here? I think mostly addressed it was you.
On speech, and there is freedom of speech, and so I don't want to take the floor away from colleagues. I mean, you just opened up a can of worms, and then you say, well, we'll be very brief, because it's which I'd be glad to be on an issue like internet intermediaries. I mean, it is that there is obviously the internet intermediaries are as gatekeepers to the internet. I mean, they have. I mean, they are attractive in many ways, because they have some capacity, and we should probably not always overestimate it, to prevent some problems from happening on the internet. I mean, at the moment, under the e-commerce directive, to put it very bluntly, of course, they are in a way exempted from liability. And so you can ask yourself the question also with, I mean, the internet has changed and is constantly changing. Is that still an appropriate policy position, or should there be some responsibilities on ISPs that would require them in some circumstances to take action? Then the question is, if that's the case, Do you need to legislate on that? Do you need to kind of redefine the liability? I mean, so far that has not been the position of the Commission. I mean, it's interesting that some commissioners or even some kind of, in this case, quite an important commissioner for internal market is making some suggestions to that end. I mean, so far we have worked more with intermediaries through self-regulation. I mean, there's, for example, the intermediaries have an important role in, when we discuss child pornography, in the notice and take down procedure. So if we can get them to work as part of a network, also having law enforcement attached to that, so that these websites indeed, as I think our Swedish colleague, that they're taken down very quickly. I mean, that is a good role for intermediaries. In other cases, I mean, intermediaries have been very positively involved in, for example, fighting botnets. In Germany is a very good example. And there is obviously, I mean, intermediaries have an interest in an internet that is safe, because people will use the internet. I mean, they will have greater usage of the internet, more people using the internet if it can be trusted. So just basically to say, look, ISPs have absolutely no responsibilities and no interest is too simple. We have to have that debate. The OECD is already having that debate on the intermediaries, and I think before too long the European Union will also have to have that debate on the role of intermediaries and whether the position as it is legally enshrined in the e-commerce directive is still the position that we think should be maintained for the foreseeable future, given that the internet is rapidly changing. I can't say more because then I would start speculating, which I'd like to do, but not in a public meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. So now to have kind of summary of the whole meeting, I will ask Mrs. Hohner, because she was collecting a little bit and trying to give an overview of what we have heard and what the possible consequences will be. Please.
Thank you very much. So I've been acting as the rapporteur for this meeting. And I have to say, it's not going to be an easy task, because I think we've already said, it's been a very rich and complex discussion, and getting the sense that it really is just the beginning of the debate. There's lots more to be said. I won't repeat what each panellist has said or give any summary, because I think that we're quite short on time now, but I'll try and just give a sense of the flavour of the kinds of issues that I think have emerged to try and draw out some of the common themes and the major issues. So I think really we've started this discussion with the sense that technology is really having a huge impact. And I think that really came out at the end in the presentation, just saying what kind of impact this is having on our society in terms of economics, human rights, politics, culture, and indeed that's why we're here having these kinds of discussions. It's been highlighted that the way that we view these changes that technologies have been having in our lives has also changed, and our analysis is getting more sophisticated as the technologies themselves evolve. So we're no longer just taking these simplistic approaches that, technologies are all good or all bad. And so we really need to be looking at these advantages, disadvantages, and working with them. And what's really emerged from this discussion, I think, is that we're working here with an extremely complex and evolving ecosystem that's full of different competing interests, different values, different incentive structures for different people that all have a stake in this complex, evolving environment. And I think what's also come out is that's one of the reasons why human rights are so important, not only because they obviously are fundamental rights that must be protected, but also because they are an international universal framework of values and, of course, law. And so that's one of the reasons why they're so useful as well, to provide a solid basis for us to start to navigate some of these really complex issues that are emerging in these environments. So then to move on, obviously, two main issues, I think, that we were discussing, mainly in the first panel, two significant challenges, censorship and surveillance, and the fact that these dynamics are really seriously undermining freedom of expression and privacy online in complex ways in different places. There's a notion that this problem is getting worse. We've got more prevalent censorship and monitoring in more complex ways, in more hidden ways, and so as a result, more dangerous. We've also heard points in both panels that, that we're not only seeing direct violations of human rights, for example, through the implementation of censorship mechanisms, but also indirect threats to the internet infrastructure, the very architecture of the internet that is so valuable, that has made the internet so valuable for freedom of expression and for human rights. So we heard on this panel, the importance of protecting, for example, the end-to-end principle and network neutrality, and considering these kinds of issues, the dangers of implementing blocking systems, or talk of a Schengen system for the internet, why these are so dangerous in terms of undermining the very characteristics that have made this medium so powerful for freedom of expression in the first place. The focus of our discussions initially were on censorship and surveillance in repressive regimes, and we heard about the complex mechanisms, particularly of monitoring and control in that first panel, and how these are affecting particularly people in Tunisia, but also in other regimes as well. But obviously also we've heard throughout the course of the panel that these problems aren't only being faced in repressive regimes. It's also democratic regimes outside of Europe, and then obviously also inside Europe itself. So there's all these tensions and dilemmas playing out across the world, and it's not only that we should be looking outwards towards repressive regimes. I think there was a general agreement that states really have a fundamental obligation to take these issues very seriously within the international human rights framework, not only to not violate rights, but also to address rights violations that are taking place by others. And so we heard about the role of different stakeholders. I think it's important not to overlook the role of individuals in civil society, and that really did come out in the course of the panel presentations. We saw the important role of individuals, of activists using communications technologies in Tunisia to push for change. We've heard from some innovative organisations, Telecomix, for example, who are providing or innovating with new technologies, new tools, ways of pushing open democratic space and shifting these balances and relations of power in different ways. And I think in regard to the use of these technologies by civil society and the experiences that we heard about in Tunisia, I think one thing that is really important for us to think about is how do we respond, how does Europe respond, how does the progressive community respond to the backlash that is going to be happening, that already is happening in repressive regimes against new technologies, because their power has been demonstrated in situations in the Middle East and North Africa region. So that's a key issue that I think was maybe underneath the surface in our discussions. A lot of the discussions we had today focused on the role of companies. There was an agreement right at the beginning in the first panel that that multi-stakeholder policy-making discussion, identification of issues and of solutions is really important. There was a general feeling from our Council of Europe representative, however, that ultimately it is the role of states to regulate, to make sure human rights aren't being violated, and indeed that's in line with the international human rights law. So we stress that rule of law and due process are essential rights, and we can't just derogate responsibilities to the private sector to self-regulate. We heard very strongly that companies can play very negative roles in terms of human rights violations online, and that was particularly apparent in the role that companies are playing in exporting surveillance technologies, for example, to repressive regimes, and we talked a lot about that. But we also heard about the positive roles that companies can play. For example, Facebook actively introducing HTTPS in Tunisia. We heard from Susan the fact that public interest discourse is increasingly being taking place on private forums, that these companies aren't just the bad guys, they are playing positive roles as well. And that just demonstrates the complexity of this environment, and that the issues aren't black and white. So we've seen that interests can align with each other. We can align business interests and incentives with our interests and incentives to protect human rights. We've talked a lot about internet businesses wanting access to new markets, how we can use free trade arguments to support freedom of expression, and to align those incentives and interest structures so that we can work together as allies to protect free expression in different places and in different markets. However, we also heard that there aren't only just alignments, but there are also huge contradictions. For example, in that role of selling technologies for censorship and surveillance. And then also at the end, we started to talk about the role of internet intermediaries, how they do require protection in order to maintain a vibrant, innovative internet that supports free expression, but that they also do have roles and responsibilities. So what we've seen really in sum is that this arena is full of contradictions and tensions, and indeed that's why we're here in the first place. We've talked about technology being a dual-edged sword, that it's not just used for good, it's a neutral technology that can be used for good and bad. But I think also it's important, the point was made at the end, that it's not apolitical. You know, these tools are political and be used in political ways. And I thought it was really interesting that we were talking about dictators' dilemmas in the context of Tunisia, but also this notion of a corporate dilemma as well. As we all stakeholders have dilemmas that we need to face here. And a major theme that came out really was the role of Europe and the importance of Europe itself getting its own house in order so that we can really not be accused of double standards, that we need to really set a positive example to the rest of the world and such if we're going to engage in a positive way. So finally, I think the cross-cutting theme throughout the discussion was really about whether we're ready for legislation and regulation in this area, and indeed what that might look like. And there's obviously a clear appetite to do something, that we need, there's a feeling that there are issues here that we really do need to regulate. However, I think there was general agreement, especially towards the end of the session, that there's no quick and easy solutions at all to this. We're at the very early stage of thinking about what these solutions might be. And so therefore I think one of the things that's come out is really let's not jump the gun. What are the dangers of introducing legislation and regulations that might do damage? And we heard a few examples of how that might happen. And how legislation and regulation that is extremely well intended can be manipulated, can start to set standards in different countries that might be used for different things. Again, human rights standards provide a solid foundation for work in this area, and it's a case of interpreting and applying the existing standards and regulations that we have. But we also heard about, in addition to regulation and legislation, additional ways of addressing the issues. And I think the point was made that this really is a complex ecosystem where we need to be quite flexible, reactive and responsive to problems and make use of the different kind of tools and approaches we have, sometimes acting very politically and sensitively in different contexts. So we heard about the role of diplomacy, really making it the case that it's too embarrassing for people to censor. The role of economic development and education. I liked the notion of peace through communication, this notion of how we really need to be demonstrating how communication and free expression can actually help to enhance security, as well as it providing a threat. We heard a little bit about the existing UN human rights engagement in the field, the work that's being done by the UN Special Rapporteur for Free Expression and John Ruggie. So how can we work with the different human rights institutions that are there? So in sum, it's a complex and evolving environment, and we need to really be working with the different institutions and mechanisms that we have within this. And the human rights framework, the international legal human rights frameworks, provides a clear and solid basis to work with from that. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I think in the oncoming political debates we will have, of course, the role of intermediaries still as one of the crucial points. And if it comes to measures to introduction of new controls or whatsoever, we will have to differentiate between policing and screening, which is one of the very crucial pathways where we have to choose and not going into the trap of having offered new sophisticated solution that would overcome this dilemma. This is a choice that the legislator has to make. I would be clear on which side of the choice I would be, because I don't even ask the postman if he's responsible for the content of the letter that has been sent to me. I think we will have to protect this fifth freedom if we really would want to make it work. I think, and this is thanks to Mrs. Susan, I always say only Susan to you. So, we will have to protect certain ideas that could evolve, that could positively evolve, and we should not always follow those technical experts that tell us that with algorithms they can solve every human rights problem, which is of course not true. And we will also be facing the necessity of revision of some legislation that has already been done, like the data retention, which is, of course, now after the review process a little bit under a different light than it has been before. And we will, of course, facing ACTA and other regulations too. So the debate will be not closed today. I think we will stay interconnected to go on with it, and I'm also happy about some comments, some articles of interest, some ideas offered to the group, to the relevant MEPs present via internet or via our mail systems, so that we can continuously work together to react properly to the challenges of new technologies. Thank you very much for being here so long. And have a nice evening. Thank you. And maybe if a Belgian policeman comes, say him the best wishes from the Commission.